At Southwest Valley Motors, where gleaming vehicles lined the pristine showroom floor, Richard Chen had worked his way up from washing cars to becoming the dealership manager over 15 years. His attention to detail and no-nonsense approach had earned him respect among both staff and customers, though some found his strict policies unnecessary in today's casual business world. On that crisp autumn morning, Richard was reviewing the monthly sales reports when Tyler, the newest sales associate, burst into his office without knocking. "Sir, there's someone in a worn-out hoodie trying to look at the luxury vehicles. He doesn't seem like our usual client, and I'm worried he might be wasting our time." Richard sighed, putting down his tablet. He'd trained his team to never judge customers by appearance, but old habits died hard. Still, he appreciated Tyler's concern for security. The dealership had dealt with its share of pranksters and time-wasters lately. "I'll handle this," Richard said, straightening his designer tie as he stood. Through the office windows, he could see a man in a faded gray hoodie and worn jeans, hands pressed against the window of their latest high-end electric vehicle model. The man's casual attire stood out sharply against the dealership's polished atmosphere. As Richard approached, he noticed something else about the potential customer. Despite the worn clothing, there was an air of confidence in how the man carried himself. The stranger was studying the vehicle's specifications with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what they were looking at. "Can I help you?" Richard asked, maintaining a professional tone while positioning himself between the man and the vehicle. The stranger turned, revealing intelligent eyes and an unexpectedly warm smile. "Yes, actually. I'm interested in acquiring several vehicles for my new tech company's executive fleet." The man's voice carried the quiet authority of someone used to making major decisions. "I've been researching various options, and your dealership came highly recommended." Richard's professional mask remained firmly in place, though something about the man's demeanor made him pause. Years of experience had taught him to spot serious buyers, regardless of their attire. This man, despite his casual appearance, spoke with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he wanted. "I see," Richard responded carefully. "And what kind of fleet size were you considering?" He gestured toward his office, following standard protocol for serious inquiries. "Initially, 15 vehicles," the man replied, following Richard while still glancing at various models they passed. "But if the service and quality meet our standards, we'd be looking at expanding that to 50 units within the year." Richard's steps faltered slightly. A fleet deal of that size would be the largest in the dealership's history. He studied the man more carefully now, noting the subtle details he'd missed at first glance: the quality of the hoodie's fabric despite its worn appearance, the expensive smart watch partially hidden under the sleeve, the confident but unpretentious way he carried himself. As they settled into Richard's office, the potential client introduced himself as David Park, CEO of Quantum Drive Technologies. Richard's heart skipped a beat. QDT was one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the region, known for its innovative approach to both technology and corporate culture. "I prefer to do my initial research incognito," David explained, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It gives me a better sense of how businesses treat all their customers, not just the ones they think are important." Richard felt a mix of emotions wash over him: embarrassment at his initial judgment, respect for the man's approach, and a growing excitement about the potential opportunity. But mostly, he felt a profound appreciation for the lesson being taught in such a graceful way. "I understand completely, Mr. Park," Richard replied, reaching for his tablet. "Though I have to admit, you've given us quite a learning opportunity today. Shall we discuss your specific requirements for the fleet?" David leaned forward, his casual demeanor shifting subtly to reveal the sharp businessman beneath. "Actually, before we get into the details, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you'd handle the ongoing maintenance and support for a fleet of this size. Our company operates 24/7, and vehicle downtime could be a significant issue." For the next hour, they engaged in a detailed discussion about fleet management, maintenance schedules, and technical specifications. Richard found himself increasingly impressed by David's technical knowledge and practical approach to the negotiation. As their meeting drew to a close, David stood and extended his hand. "I appreciate your time today, Richard. And even more, I appreciate how quickly you adjusted your approach once we began talking. It shows adaptability, something we value highly at QDT." Richard accepted the handshake, feeling the firm grip of someone used to sealing important deals. "Thank you for giving us the opportunity to earn your business, Mr. Park. And thank you for the reminder about looking beyond first impressions." As David left the dealership, Richard called his team together for an impromptu meeting. The story of their unexpected visitor became a powerful teaching moment about prejudgment and the importance of treating every customer with equal respect. That evening, as Richard updated the day's reports, he reflected on how close they'd come to losing a potentially historic deal because of superficial judgments. The lesson wasn't just about sales or business, it was about human dignity and the simple truth that real value, whether in people or opportunities, often came in unexpected packages. News of the fleet deal spread quickly through the industry in the following weeks, and Southwest Valley Motors became known as the dealership that won QDT's business. But for Richard and his team, the real victory wasn't in the sale itself, it was in the permanent change it brought to their dealership's culture. Tyler, who had first raised concerns about David's presence, became one of the dealership's top performers, known specifically for his ability to connect with customers from all walks of life. He often shared the story of that day as a turning point in his career, a lesson about keeping an open mind and treating everyone with respect. The experience had transformed their dealership from a simple business into a place where every customer, regardless of appearance or background, received the same high level of service. It was a change that would impact countless interactions in the years to come, proving that sometimes the most valuable business lessons come disguised in a worn-out hoodie. The ripple effects of David Park's visit to Southwest Valley Motors continued to shape the dealership in unexpected ways. 3 months after the initial fleet deal, Richard found himself facing new challenges and opportunities that would test the lessons learned from that memorable day. One morning, as the California sun cast long shadows across the showroom floor, Richard noticed an elderly couple hesitating at the entrance. The woman wore a simple floral dress that had seen better days, while the man's weathered hands spoke of decades of manual labor. Some of the sales team seemed to be avoiding eye contact, falling back into old habits. Before Richard could intervene, Tyler, the same associate who had once rushed to report David Park's presence, approached the couple with genuine warmth. "Welcome to Southwest Valley Motors. I'm Tyler. Can I help you find something specific today?" Richard watched with pride as Tyler guided the couple through the showroom, taking time to understand their needs. It turned out the couple's grandson had recently graduated medical school, and they wanted to surprise him with his first new car. They'd been saving for years, keeping the money in a coffee tin at home. As Tyler handled the situation with patience and respect, Richard's phone buzzed with a message from David Park, dropping by in an hour to discuss expanding our fleet deal. Bringing some interesting news. The dealership had already delivered the first batch of 15 vehicles to Quantum Drive Technologies, each one meeting the exact specifications David had outlined. The process had gone smoothly, though Richard had insisted on personally overseeing every detail. When David arrived this time, he wore a crisp business suit that probably cost more than some of the cars on the lot. The transformation from his first visit was striking, yet his demeanor remained exactly the same, humble, focused, and sharp as ever. "Richard," David said, shaking his hand warmly. "Your team has exceeded our expectations with the initial fleet. But that's not why I'm here today." He paused, glancing around the showroom. "We're launching a new corporate transportation initiative, and we want Southwest Valley Motors to be our exclusive partner." Richard listened intently as David outlined a revolutionary program. QDT planned to provide electric vehicles to all employees above a certain pay grade, with an option for others to buy at a deeply discounted rate through a salary sacrifice scheme. The potential numbers made Richard's head spin. This could mean hundreds of vehicles over the next year alone. But here's the catch, David continued, his expression serious. We need you to establish a dedicated service center near our campus. It's a significant investment on your part, but we're prepared to sign a 5-year exclusive contract. As they discussed the details in Richard's office, he noticed Tyler concluding the sale with the elderly couple. The grandson had been called, and the young doctor-to-be was in tears as his grandparents handed over their savings in carefully counted bills. Tyler handled the moment with incredible grace, treating the cash with the same respect he would a corporate check. The parallel between the two situations struck Richard deeply. On one side, he had a potential deal that could transform his dealership into one of the largest in the state. On the other, he watched a small but equally significant transaction that represented years of sacrifice and love. You're not fully focused, David observed, following Richard's gaze. Tell me what you're thinking. Richard shared the story of the elderly couple and their grandson, expecting David to politely acknowledge it and return to business. Instead, David's eyes lit up with interest. That's exactly why we chose your dealership, David said, surprising Richard. We've been monitoring how your team handles all types of customers since our first interaction. That kind of consistent respect and service is rare, and it's exactly what we need for our employees. The conversation shifted to how they could structure the deal to benefit both large corporate clients and individual customers. David revealed that QDT's transportation initiative was part of a larger plan to reduce their environmental impact while improving employee satisfaction. As they worked through the details, Richard received another surprise. The elderly couple's grandson, overwhelmed by his grandparents' gesture, had posted about his experience at Southwest Valley Motors on social media. The post was already going viral, with thousands of shares celebrating the grandparents' sacrifice and the dealership's handling of the situation. You see? David said, showing Richard the post on his phone. This is marketing you can't buy. This is what happens when you build a culture of genuine respect and service. By the end of the day, Richard had not only secured the expanded fleet deal but had also gained a deeper understanding of how small moments could lead to big changes. The video of the grandson receiving his car, shared with permission, would later become part of the dealership's training material, alongside the story of David's first visit. That evening, after the papers were signed and the celebrations had died down, Richard sat in his office looking at a photo of his own grandfather, who had started as a mechanic before opening a small car repair shop. He wondered what his grandfather would think of how far they'd come, not just in terms of business success, but in understanding what really mattered in building a lasting legacy. The next morning, Richard called a team meeting to announce the QDT deal. But before discussing the business aspects, he took time to recognize Tyler's handling of the elderly couple's purchase. This is who we are now, he told his team. Whether it's a multi-million-dollar fleet deal or a single car bought with savings from a coffee tin, we treat everyone with the same respect and dedication. The story of Southwest Valley Motors' transformation continued to spread, attracting attention from other businesses and changing the way people thought about car dealerships. But for Richard and his team, success was measured not in dollars or units sold, but in the smiles of customers who felt truly valued, regardless of their background or budget. As spring bloomed across the valley, Southwest Valley Motors underwent its own transformation. Construction had begun on the dedicated service center near the QDT campus, and the dealership's reputation had grown far beyond their local community. But with growth came new challenges that would test the values they'd worked so hard to establish. One particularly busy Saturday, a food truck pulled into the dealership's parking lot. The driver, Mrs. Lee, had been serving lunch to their staff for years from her small but popular Korean fusion truck. She parked in her usual spot, but today she wasn't just there to sell food, she had come with a dream. My daughter just got accepted to medical school, she told Richard during a quiet moment, her eyes bright with pride. I want to surprise her with a reliable car before she leaves for university. She hesitated before adding, "I've been saving everything I can from the food truck business." Richard noticed how her hands nervously twisted the worn business license she'd brought as proof of income. Before he could respond, a commotion near the front entrance caught everyone's attention. A group of executives from a competing dealership network had arrived unannounced, led by their CEO, Thomas Reynolds. "Richard!" Reynolds called out, his voice carrying across the showroom. "We need to talk about a merger opportunity. Your recent success has caught our board's attention." His expensive suit and commanding presence drew all eyes in the room. Richard found himself torn between two very different situations, the corporate executive demanding immediate attention and Mrs. Lee, who had quietly served their dealership community for years. The old Richard might have automatically prioritized the seemingly more important business meeting. Instead, he turned to Mrs. Lee. "Please, let's continue our conversation. Tyler will help you look at some options that match your budget while I briefly speak with these gentlemen." He gestured to Tyler, who immediately understood the significance of the moment. As Tyler guided Mrs. Lee through their certified pre-owned section, Richard led Reynolds and his team to the conference room. The merger offer was impressive, the kind of deal that would have seemed like a dream just a year ago. But something felt off about their aggressive approach and focus on rapid expansion. Through the conference room's windows, Richard could see Tyler showing Mrs. Lee a reliable compact car, perfect for a medical student's needs. He watched as she carefully examined every detail, the same way she meticulously prepared each dish she served from her truck. "Your numbers since the QDT deal are remarkable," Reynolds was saying, spreading documents across the table. "But you need our resources to scale properly. We can help you become the largest dealership group in 3 states. Richard's phone buzzed with a message from David Park. Heard Reynolds showed up. "Remember why QDT chose you. Size isn't everything." The timing was uncanny. David's network of industry connections clearly ran deep. "Thank you for the offer," Richard said, standing up. "But I need time to review this with my team. We've built something special here, and any changes would need to align with our values." Reynolds frowned. "The offer expires today. This is business, Richard. Don't let sentiment cloud your judgment." As if to underscore the moment, a burst of applause erupted from the showroom. Mrs. Lee was hugging Tyler, tears of joy streaming down her face. Her daughter, who Tyler had secretly called, had arrived to find her mother signing papers for what would be her first new car, not just the used one she'd planned to buy. The dealership staff had spontaneously pooled their food truck loyalty points and combined them with an employee discount program Richard hadn't even known they'd organized. The result had put a new car within Mrs. Lee's budget. "Actually," Richard said, turning back to Reynolds, "sentiment is exactly what built this business. Thank you for your offer, but we'll have to decline." The words came easily, with absolute certainty. Reynolds stood, his expression hard. "You're making a mistake. The market's changing. Small, independent dealerships won't survive." "We're not just surviving," Richard replied, walking him to the door. "We're showing there's another way to do business." He gestured toward the scene in the showroom, where Mrs. Lee was now insisting on providing a celebration lunch for everyone from her food truck. After Reynolds and his team left, Richard joined his staff in the parking lot, where Mrs. Lee was serving her famous fusion tacos. The impromptu celebration had turned into a perfect example of the community they'd built. David Park showed up just as everyone was eating, drawn by both the food truck's reputation and news of Reynolds' visit. He found Richard sitting with Mrs. Lee and her daughter, listening to their stories about working together in the tiny food truck through countless late nights. "You know," David said, accepting a taco from Mrs. Lee with a respectful bow, "this is exactly why we're expanding our deal with you. Reynolds doesn't understand that success isn't just about size, it's about creating real connections." The afternoon turned into an unexpected celebration of their dealership's journey. Mrs. Lee's daughter shared her medical school dreams, Tyler talked about his transformed approach to sales, and David revealed that QDT's employee vehicle program was being studied by other tech companies as a model for corporate transportation. As the sun began to set, Richard watched his team helping Mrs. Lee clean up, treating her food truck with the same respect they showed the luxury vehicles in their showroom. The sight confirmed what he'd known in his gut: turning down the merger was the right decision. That evening, as Richard updated the dealership's mission statement, he added a new core value: success is measured not in units sold, but in lives touched. It wasn't just a fancy phrase, it was a truth they lived by, proven one customer at a time. The summer heat shimmered off the pavement as Southwest Valley Motors prepared for their biggest challenge yet. The dedicated service center near QDT was ready to open, and Richard had decided to promote Tyler to manage it. However, this meant finding someone who could fill Tyler's shoes at the main dealership, someone who truly understood their values. That morning, Richard arrived early to find an unexpected visitor waiting in the parking lot. An older gentleman in a well-worn mechanic's uniform stood beside a beautifully maintained classic car from the 1960s. The name tag on his uniform read Joe, and his hands bore the honest calluses of decades working with engines. "I heard you're hiring," Joe said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of experience. "My shop's being torn down for a new development. After 40 years, I need to make a change." He patted the classic car beside him. "Rebuilt her myself. Thought she'd make a better impression than a resume." Before Richard could respond, a sleek executive transport from QDT pulled into the lot. David Park stepped out, followed by a team of corporate advisors clutching tablets and looking concerned. "Richard, we need to talk. There's been a complication with the employee vehicle program." Richard glanced between Joe and David, remembering the lessons of the past few months. "David, would you mind if Joe joined our discussion? I have a feeling his experience might be valuable here." In the conference room, David explained the situation. Some of QDT's employees were reporting issues with their vehicles, nothing major, but persistent small problems that were causing frustration. The corporate advisors presented charts showing declining satisfaction rates. "If we can't resolve this quickly," one advisor said, "we'll need to reconsider the entire program." Joe, who had been quietly listening, cleared his throat. "Mind if I ask what kind of issues we're talking about?" As the problems were described, Joe's expression shifted from curiosity to understanding. "Sounds like a software issue, not mechanical. These new cars, they're basically computers on wheels. But drivers still need to feel connected to their vehicles, understand them. That's what's missing." David leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Back in my shop," Joe explained, "I didn't just fix cars, I taught people about their vehicles. Made them feel comfortable with the technology. These days, everyone's so focused on the digital features, they forget about the human connection." Richard watched as David's concerned expression transformed into interest. This was exactly the kind of insight they needed, a bridge between traditional automotive wisdom and modern technology. "What if," Richard suggested, "we created a program that combines technical training with Joe's approach to customer education? Something that helps QDT employees really understand their vehicles, not just use them?" The idea took root quickly. Joe sketched out a basic curriculum on a whiteboard, a mixture of hands-on basics and user-friendly technology orientation. David's team started calculating how this could improve user satisfaction rates. "This is why we partnered with you," David said to Richard. "You understand that innovation isn't just about technology, it's about people." By the end of the meeting, they had a plan. Joe would join the team as their lead technical trainer, working with both the main dealership and the new service center. His first task would be developing the education program for QDT employees. As the corporate team left, David pulled Richard aside. "You know, when I first visited this dealership in my hoodie, I was looking for exactly this, people who could see past the surface to what really matters. The next few weeks brought a flurry of activity. Joe transformed a section of the new service center into what he called the Understanding Zone, a place where customers could learn about their vehicles in a relaxed, hands-on environment. His classic car became a teaching tool, demonstrating basic automotive principles that applied even to the most modern vehicles. Tyler, preparing for his new role, spent hours with Joe, absorbing decades of wisdom about both cars and people. The two men, despite their age difference, formed a quick bond based on their shared belief in the importance of customer education. One evening, as Richard was leaving the dealership, he found Joe teaching a group of QDT engineers about their new vehicles. The scene was remarkable, highly trained tech professionals listening intently as Joe explained complex systems in simple, relatable terms. You see, Joe was saying, every car has a personality. Even these new electric ones. Once you understand that, everything else falls into place. The engineers were taking notes, their initial skepticism replaced by genuine interest. The impact of Joe's approach became evident quickly. Customer satisfaction scores began rising, and QDT employees started referring to their vehicles by nicknames, a sign they developed personal connections with their cars. The sterile technology had become something more human. Richard observed all this with a sense of pride and wonder. The dealership had become more than just a place to buy cars, it was a community where technology and humanity met, where old wisdom and new innovations worked together to create something special. That Friday afternoon, Richard hosted a small celebration at the service center. Mrs. Lee brought her food truck, Joe parked his classic car on display, and David joined them without his usual corporate entourage. As they shared stories and food, Richard realized they'd created something unique, a place where every person, regardless of their role or background, contributed to a larger story. You know, Joe said, sharing some of Mrs. Lee's fusion tacos with a group of young QDT programmers, in 40 years of fixing cars, I never thought I'd end up teaching tech experts. But here's the thing, people are people, and everyone wants to feel connected to their vehicle, whether it's got a V8 engine or runs on batteries. As autumn painted the valley in warm colors, Southwest Valley Motors faced an unexpected challenge. A popular tech blog had published an article about their unique approach to the QDT partnership, and suddenly, the dealership was flooded with visitors from other companies wanting to study their model. The small revolution they'd started was growing beyond their expectations. One morning, Richard arrived to find a group of international executives touring the facility without permission, taking photos and making notes. At the service center, Tyler was dealing with a backlog of QDT vehicles while trying to maintain their high standards of personal attention. The success they'd worked so hard for was threatening to overwhelm them. We need help, Tyler admitted during their morning video call. But not just any help. We need people who understand what we're trying to do here. Behind him, Joe was patiently explaining something to a customer, using his characteristic blend of technical knowledge and folksy wisdom. Richard rubbed his temples, thinking. The dealership's reputation had grown so much that they'd received dozens of applications from experienced salespeople and technicians. But finding people who truly understood their philosophy was proving difficult. That afternoon, as Richard pondered their staffing challenges, he noticed a young woman walking through the showroom, studying everything intently. Unlike the corporate tourists, she wasn't taking photos or making notes. Instead, she was watching the interactions between staff and customers, paying particular attention to how Joe handled questions at the understanding zone. "Can I help you?" Richard asked, approaching her. The woman turned, revealing a warm smile. "I hope so. I'm Jenny Patel. I used to work for one of those big tech companies, but I left because everything felt too automated. Then I saw the video of your elderly couple buying their grandson a car, and later, the story about Mrs. Lee and her food truck. I knew I had to see this place for myself." As they talked, Richard learned that Jenny had a unique background. She'd worked in customer experience design for a major tech company but had grown disillusioned with the industry's focus on automation over human connection. She'd spent the last year traveling, studying how different businesses built relationships with their customers. "Your dealership is doing something remarkable," she said. "You're not just selling cars, you're building a community. But from what I've observed today, you're at a tipping point. Growth could either strengthen or destroy what makes this place special." Richard was intrigued. "What would you suggest?" Before Jenny could answer, David Park arrived, looking concerned. "Richard, we need to talk. Other companies are pressuring our board to replicate the vehicle program with their dealerships. They're offering significant incentives." Richard invited both David and Jenny to his office. As they discussed the situation, Jenny listened intently before offering her perspective. "What if," she suggested, "instead of fighting the growth, you embraced it in your own way? Create a training academy that teaches your approach to customer service. Not just for car dealerships, but for any business that wants to put human connections first." The idea resonated with both men. David saw it as a way to protect their partnership while allowing QDT to showcase their progressive approach to corporate transportation. Richard recognized it as a path to grow without losing their soul. Within weeks, Jenny had joined the team, working with Joe to develop what they called the Human Connection Academy. The program combined Joe's practical wisdom with Jenny's understanding of modern business needs, creating something entirely new in the industry. Their first group of students included managers from other dealerships, corporate customer service teams, and even a few tech startup founders. Joe taught them about building trust through technical expertise, while Jenny helped them understand how to scale personal attention in a digital age. The academy quickly became known for its unique approach. Instead of traditional classroom learning, students spent time working alongside the Southwest Valley Motors team, experiencing firsthand how to balance efficiency with personal connection. One day, as Richard watched Joe teaching a class about the importance of listening to both customers and cars, he noticed something remarkable. The students weren't just taking notes, they were sharing their own stories, contributing to the collective wisdom of the group. Mrs. Lee's food truck became a regular fixture at the academy, not just providing meals but serving as a living example of how small businesses could maintain their personal touch while growing. Her daughter, now in medical school, occasionally visited to share how the dealership's approach had inspired her own dreams of combining medical expertise with genuine patient care. The academy's impact spread beyond the automotive industry. Tech companies started sending their user experience teams to learn about human-centered design. Retail chains began implementing programs inspired by the understanding zone concept. Even hospitals showed interest in how Southwest Valley Motors balanced technical expertise with personal attention. One evening, as Richard was leaving the office, he found Jenny and Joe sitting in Joe's classic car, brainstorming ideas for the academy's curriculum. "You know what makes this place special?" Jenny was saying. "It's not just about selling cars or fixing engines. It's about remembering that behind every transaction, there's a human story." Joe nodded, patting the car's dashboard affectionately. "That's right. Whether it's a classic like this one or those new electric vehicles, what matters is the person behind the wheel. Always has been, always will be." Richard smiled, remembering how far they'd come from the day David first walked in wearing his hoodie. They'd created something that went beyond business success. They'd built a movement based on the simple idea that human connections matter. That weekend, they hosted a community day at the dealership. The parking lot was filled with cars spanning decades, from Joe's lovingly maintained classic to the latest QDT electric vehicles. Mrs. Lee's food truck served fusion dishes to a diverse crowd of customers, students, and staff. David Park mingled with the crowd, his corporate title forgotten as he shared stories with academy students. Winter brought new challenges to Southwest Valley Motors as their Human Connection Academy gained national attention. A major business magazine had featured their story, calling them the dealership that changed an industry. While the recognition was gratifying, it also brought unexpected pressures. One chilly morning, Richard arrived to find a film crew setting up in the showroom. A popular streaming service wanted to document their unique approach, focusing on the stories of Joe's understanding zone and the transformation of corporate culture at QDT through their vehicle program. "This isn't what we're about," Joe grumbled, watching the crew arrange lights around his beloved classic car. "We're here to help people, not become some kind of reality show." Jenny, who had been helping coordinate the increased media interest, understood both the opportunity and the risk. "Maybe we can use this to show what real customer service looks like," she suggested. "Not the scripted kind you usually see, but genuine human connections." As they debated how to handle the situation, a weathered pickup truck pulled into the service center. The driver, an elderly rancher named Ray Henderson, had driven 3 hours after hearing about their approach to customer service. His small cattle ranch was struggling, and he needed reliable transportation but had been turned away from other dealerships due to his modest budget. The film crew immediately saw the potential for drama, moving to capture the interaction. But Tyler smoothly guided Ray to a quieter area, away from the cameras. "Tell me about your needs first," he said. "The cameras can wait." Over coffee in the break room, Ray shared his story. The ranch had been in his family for generations, but recent droughts had made things difficult. He needed a truck that could handle ranch work but wasn't looking for anything fancy. What touched everyone was how he spoke about his responsibility to his small team of workers, who depended on the ranch for their livelihood. Richard, listening nearby, was reminded of why they'd started their revolution in customer service. He approached the film crew's director with a proposition: "If you want to tell our real story, start with people like Ray. No staging, no drama, just genuine interactions." The director, surprisingly, agreed. What followed was a subtle shift in their documentation approach. Instead of trying to create dramatic moments, they simply observed as the Southwest Valley Motors team did what they did best: connecting with people. They captured Joe teaching young QDT engineers about their vehicles, his weathered hands pointing out features while sharing wisdom that bridged the gap between old and new technology. They filmed Jenny working with academy students, showing how to maintain personal connections even as businesses grow. Mrs. Lee's food truck became an unexpected star, with the cameras capturing how her daily presence had become integral to the dealership's community. The way she remembered everyone's preferences and shared stories over lunch became a powerful example of the human touches that made businesses special. The most powerful moment came when Ray returned a week later. The team had found him a certified pre-owned truck that met his needs and worked out a financing plan he could manage. But what the cameras caught wasn't just a sales transaction, it was the genuine celebration of the entire team when Ray received his keys. "You folks did more than sell me a truck," Ray said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me hope that there are still businesses that care about regular people." The film crew's presence had an unexpected effect on the academy students as well. Watching their mentors maintain their principles under the pressure of cameras helped them understand that authentic customer service wasn't about performance, it was about consistency and genuine care. David Park visited during the filming, bringing news that QDT's employee vehicle program had become a case study at several business schools. "But that's not why I'm here," he said, declining the director's request for an interview. "I came to thank the team that made it possible." One evening, after the film crew had packed up for the day, Richard found Joe and Jenny sitting in the understanding zone, discussing how to maintain their values as their influence grew. "You know what I realized?" Jenny said, looking around at the space that had become a symbol of their approach. "We're not just teaching people about cars or customer service. We're showing them that success doesn't have to mean losing your humanity." Joe nodded, absently polishing a wrench as he often did while thinking. "My old shop never made headlines or had film crews around. But what we're doing here, treating people right, sharing knowledge, building trust, that's exactly what I did there. We've just found a way to show others it still works. Richard watched as Tyler led a late academy session nearby, using Ray's story to illustrate how genuine customer service could transform both businesses and lives. The students were engaged not because they were being taught a technique, but because they were witnessing authentic human connection. That night, reviewing footage with the director, Richard saw their dealership through fresh eyes. Every interaction captured on film told a story of transformation, not just for customers like Ray, but for the staff, the academy students, and even the film crew themselves. Spring returned to the valley, bringing with it an unexpected visitor to Southwest Valley Motors. The documentary about their dealership had aired, and its impact was greater than anyone had anticipated. But it wasn't the media attention that made this particular morning special, it was the arrival of a young woman named Lily Chen. "I'm Richard's daughter," she announced to the surprised staff, having returned early from her business studies abroad. The resemblance was clear in her determined expression, though few at the dealership had known Richard had a daughter, as he rarely spoke about his personal life. Richard was in a meeting with David Park when Tyler rushed in to tell him about Lily's arrival. The reunion between father and daughter was touching, but there was something more in Lily's expression, a mixture of pride and purpose. "I saw the documentary, Dad," she said once they had a moment alone. "What you've built here, it's exactly what I've been studying. But you've done it in a way my professors said was impossible in today's market." The story emerged over lunch at Mrs. Lee's food truck. Lily had been studying modern business practices in Europe, focusing on how traditional companies could adapt to the digital age. The documentary about Southwest Valley Motors had become a topic of discussion in her classes, though she'd kept quiet about her connection to it. "My professors kept saying that personal service had to be sacrificed for efficiency," Lily explained, as Mrs. Lee added extra kimchi to her bowl, remembering Richard's preference that had apparently passed to his daughter. "But you've proved them wrong." Joe, who had joined them for lunch, chuckled. "Nothing efficient about caring," he said, wiping his hands on his ever-present shop rag. "But it works better than anything else." As Lily spent time at the dealership, she began to see how her academic knowledge could complement their practical experience. She noticed opportunities to streamline processes without losing the human touch that made them special. Her fresh perspective, combined with their established wisdom, suggested new possibilities. One afternoon, while watching Jenny conduct an academy session, Lily approached her father with an idea. "What if we created a youth program?" she suggested. "Not just about cars or business, but about connecting with people. Start them young, before they get caught up in the efficiency above all mindset." The idea took root quickly. They called it the Future Connectors program, designed for high school students interested in business. But unlike traditional internships, it focused on the human side of commerce, teaching young people how to build relationships, understand customer needs, and maintain authenticity in a digital world. The program's first major test came when a local high school's automotive club visited. Among them was Mrs. Lee's nephew, who had been struggling to find his path after deciding college wasn't for him. As Joe showed the students around the understanding zone, something clicked. "You mean I can work with cars and still use my people skills?" the young man asked, his eyes lighting up as Joe explained how technical knowledge and human connection work together. The success of the youth program added another dimension to their growing influence. Parents began calling, asking not just about cars but about opportunities for their children to learn these vital skills. The dealership was becoming an unexpected bridge between generations, teaching timeless values through modern means. David Park, watching all this unfold, saw an opportunity to expand QDT's involvement. "We need young people who understand both technology and human connection," he said during a planning meeting. "This program could be a pipeline for a new kind of corporate culture." As spring progressed, the dealership hummed with activity. Academy students mingled with high schoolers, each group learning from the other. Joe found himself teaching not just about cars, but about life, drawing on his decades of experience to guide young minds. Jenny incorporated the students' social media savvy into their customer connection strategies, while Tyler showed them how to maintain professionalism without losing authenticity. One day, Richard watched as Lily led a group of students through a customer interaction exercise. She had her father's instinct for genuine connection but brought her own modern perspective to it. The sight made him realize that their revolution in customer service wasn't just changing the present, it was shaping the future. Mrs. Lee, ever observant from her food truck, noticed how the dealership's atmosphere had evolved. "You've built a school of life here," she told Richard one quiet afternoon. "Not just selling cars or teaching business, you're showing people how to be human in a world that often forgets." The impact became clear when they received a letter from one of their young program participants. He had started a small business in his neighborhood, applying the principles he'd learned at the dealership. "I realized it's not about what you're selling," he wrote. "It's about how you make people feel when they interact with you." As the first group of future connectors completed their program, a graduation ceremony was held in the showroom. Joe's classic car gleamed in the background as young people shared their experiences. Parents listened with pride as their children spoke about lessons that went far beyond business or automobiles. The crisp morning air buzzed with anticipation as Southwest Valley Motors prepared to celebrate its first anniversary since the transformation began. The parking lot was filled with cars that told their own stories: Joe's classic beauty, Ray's ranch truck, Mrs. Lee's food truck, and dozens of QDT's electric vehicles, all symbols of the journey they'd shared. Richard stood in his office, looking out at the growing crowd. The documentary had aired in several countries now, and their story had inspired similar changes at dealerships across the globe. But today wasn't about their success, it was about the community they'd built. Lily approached, carrying a thick folder. "Dad, you need to see this," she said, spreading out letters across his desk. They were from dealerships worldwide, sharing stories of how they'd implemented their own versions of the Understanding Zone and Future Connectors program. Each letter spoke of returning to values that had been forgotten in the rush toward automation and efficiency. "We didn't just change our dealership," Lily said softly. "We started a movement." Outside, Joe was giving his last official tour of the Understanding Zone. After a year of mentoring both young and old, he had decided to step into a new role as the Academy's Chief Wisdom Officer, focusing on sharing his lifetime of experience with future generations. "Remember," he told the gathered crowd, his hand resting on the hood of his classic car, "every vehicle that comes through those doors isn't just a machine, it's part of someone's story. Our job is to make sure that story has a happy chapter here." The celebration had drawn an unexpected mix of people. Ray had driven in from his ranch, which was thriving now thanks to the reliable truck and the business advice he'd received from the dealership team. He'd brought some of his workers, who were now enrolled in the Academy's weekend programs. Mrs. Lee had closed her food truck for the day, a rare occurrence, to be part of the formal celebration. Her daughter was home from medical school, wearing her white coat as she helped serve traditional Korean dishes alongside her mother. The food truck had become such an integral part of the dealership's story that they'd officially made her a partner, creating a dedicated space for her business. David Park arrived without his usual corporate entourage, bringing news that would change everything. "The QDT board has approved a global expansion of our vehicle program," he announced during the ceremony. "But more importantly, they want to implement the human connection model across all our operations. We're not just changing how people buy cars, we're changing how companies think about customer service." Jenny, who had been instrumental in documenting their methods, shared the latest data from their Academy graduates. Businesses that had adopted their approach were seeing not just improved sales but stronger community connections and employee satisfaction. The numbers proved what they'd known all along: treating people with genuine care was good for everyone. Tyler, now managing both the Service Center and the Future Connectors program, introduced the newest group of young participants. Among them was Mrs. Lee's nephew, who had discovered his talent for combining technical knowledge with customer service. "These young people," Tyler said, "aren't just learning about cars or business, they're learning how to make a difference in people's lives." As the celebrations continued, Richard noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Thomas Reynolds, the CEO who had once tried to buy them out. He seemed different now, humbled perhaps by how events had unfolded. "You were right," Reynolds admitted when they finally spoke. "I was so focused on size and numbers that I forgot what this business is really about. I've been watching what you've built here, and, well, I was wondering if there's room for one more student at your academy?" The request was unexpected but fitting. Their revolution had always been about opening doors, not closing them. Richard watched as Joe immediately took Reynolds under his wing, leading him toward the understanding zone with the same patience he showed every student. As evening approached, the celebration moved to the showroom floor. The space had been transformed, with Joe's classic car at the center, surrounded by photos telling their year-long story. Each image captured a moment of connection: Ray getting his truck keys, Mrs. Lee's daughter's surprise car, young students learning from Joe, academy graduates implementing their lessons. Lily had prepared a special presentation, combining clips from the documentary with new footage of their global impact. On screens around the showroom, dealership owners from different countries shared how the Southwest Valley Motors model had helped them rediscover their purpose. A year ago, Richard addressed the gathered crowd, "We made a choice to put human connections first. We didn't know where it would lead, but we knew it was right. Today, looking at all of you, our team, our customers, our students, our community, I see that it was more than right. It was necessary." Mrs. Lee, who had insisted on providing the evening's feast, raised her glass in a toast. "To connections," she said simply, and the crowd echoed her words. As the night wound down, Richard found himself back in his office with Joe, Jenny, Tyler, and Lily. They looked out at the parking lot, where the mix of vehicles seemed to tell the story of their journey, from Joe's classic car to the latest electric models, each representing a connection made, a life touched, a story changed. "You know what's really amazing?" Joe said, his wise eyes twinkling. "We did all this just by remembering something simple, that every business is really about people. Everything else is just details." The legacy of Southwest Valley Motors had become something none of them could have imagined that day when David Park first walked in wearing his hoodie. They had shown that success could be measured not just in sales figures but in lives improved, connections made, and values preserved. As Richard looked at his daughter, now confidently leading their youth programs while bringing fresh ideas to their model, he knew their story was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning, a new chapter in a continuing story about the power of human connection in an increasingly disconnected world.